I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Well, welcome. Guess what? This is episode 10.
Episode 10, we made it.
10.
Thank you to all of our listeners and viewers out there.
I know. And hopefully viewers now, just a little caveat to those of you who've gotten used to listening to our podcast, you can still do that. But we're on YouTube now. Woohoo! Yes. So we're recording this video as well as audio. So you've got lots of choices. And if you want to see us, because I know for some people that's important to be able to keep in context, you know, you can watch us now on YouTube. Not all of our episodes. I think that started with episode 8. We've got 2 of them on there now. So all the beginning ones are just audio, but
yeah, we're evolving and expanding, and
we are
that. Yeah.
So, well, a lot has happened.
I know.
A lot has happened in the past 48 hours particularly, but yeah, and so much so that I kind of I wrote some stuff down because I was like, you know, I can't keep it all straight in my head. There's so many things swirling around.
What's on your mind? We have now less than 100 days to
90 something until the election. Yeah. And in the US, for those of you that might be outside of this country. So I mean, the biggest thing, I guess, that's happened in this past 48 hours, 72 hours is that, well, I guess in the past week is that our current sitting president, President Biden, didn't step down from the presidency, but stepped down off of the ticket to run for re-election and cast his vote behind his current VP, Kamala Harris. So for the past, 9 to 10 days, she's been hitting the campaign trail. And then just yesterday, she named who she was picking as her vice president pick. So there's been a lot of chitter chatter about all of that.
Like when you heard that Biden was stepping down and it was passing to Kamala, did you have a reaction? Like, you know, what were your thoughts?
I have quite a few criticisms of Kamala as a part of this sitting administration, especially around what's happening in Palestine and our continued support of that. And I don't take her out of that kind of responsibility place because she is part of the administration, even if, you know, there's questions about how much the VP really has to do in any of that. She's still part of it. The thing that really excited me, and I'd be curious to hear if you had any thoughts around this, is the event of him actually stepping off of the ticket and endorsing her to rise to the top of the ticket less than 100 days before the general election. I would have liked for him to do it sooner. I had these dreams when he first got elected. I had these dreams that he would step down out of the presidency about 2 years in and have her ascend to the presidency and then have 2 years of actually being in the role and, you know, breaking that glass ceiling in real time. And then when the election rolled around in 2024, she would be running for reelect instead of, you know, running for election at the top of the ticket. So I'm bummed that he waited as long as he did to do it. But the thing that excited me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that I don't think this has ever happened before, where a sitting president who is actively running for re-election has stepped off of the ticket and, you know, and the vice president has come to the top of the ticket just 100 days out or even any time frame out without, of course, that president maybe dying and the vice president steps into that role. So I don't think this particular iteration of events has happened before. Might be wrong about that. Drop it in the comments if I am. And the thing that I kept hearing in my ears is the pressure worked. The pressure worked. We've been putting so much pressure on the administration to stop the war in Gaza, to stop sending arms to Israel, to stop, just stop. And the uncommitted vote that happened in the primaries, where I participated in that, where I voted uncommitted because that was on my ballot. And I think that was a very strong showing to Biden that he didn't have the support he thought he was going to. And so when I heard that he was actually doing it, I was excited because it proved that the efforts that we have been putting forward to try to get him to listen and to step down worked. And it was just a further, example that our electorate does have a voice. We just have to be really diligent with it. So I'm going to stop talking. That's my initial experience. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so first, let me go back to I don't dream about what's going to happen in the presidency. My unconscious moments thinking about.
Yeah, that's so, my white liberal sneaking in. So
I just thought that was funny. My first thought in hearing it was the fascination kind of with what you brought forward is that public narrative is actually shifting what it is that we are able to support or not support. As far as who is in elections, I'm thinking also about like hearing about what's happening in Bangladesh and how they're trying to figure out, knowing that they did something like this, I think in France. Mm-hmm. There is a uprising of the public that is saying a lot of what we are being offered is not acceptable anymore. Yeah. Right? And so we are going to actually mobilize together and like create a shift. So I'm really fascinated about that happening kind of on the political sphere in a global way. The other thing was just like when and Donald Trump and Joe Biden are 3 years apart. Yeah. So I was thinking about ageism. So my heart space went to, oh man, ageism is real out here in the US, which we know. But then also it was like in the last performance, it was clear that there was a lot more stress on ability to perform. Mm-hmm. Being a high stress job and position, I'm glad that Joe Biden is making the decision or allowed pressure to get him to understand what self-care looks like and to like just be okay with that. Kamala rising, my second thought then, Kamala rising into being the person who is leading the Democratic ticket is that this would be an automatic shoo-in for Donald Trump in the presidency because we're not ready. America's not ready to elect a Black woman president. Okay. And that's just what my brain said. It's like, all right, now we have to start strategizing and being prepared for Project 2025 and Donald Trump being the forerunner and winning the election. And now we have to dig our heels in and get really serious about it. Especially having residents in Florida and seeing Florida as like kind of like a project state for what, conservative, regressive legislative priorities look like.
Yeah.
So that's what that was a thought about. Yeah. But I also know you have
that's real
on your mind. So what was that agenda? Because I want to be able to go to have.
Yeah, so Kamala rising and the pressure around that, the VP pick, because that just got announced yesterday based on when we're recording this, Tim Walz, who's Minnesota governor. And then something that's been coming up for me in conversations with folks in my circles around this sense of, well, it's a done deal, and reminding them that we have to keep the pressure on, especially, between now and election day, because we hold the most cards that we will ever hold to this presidential ticket right now, because they need something from us, which is our vote. And so, we learned that pretty quickly when Biden got in and he had the House and the Senate, and he kept saying he was going to codify Roe and he never did it. He kept saying he was going to do all these things. He never did them. And so we can't rely on what happens after the election, but now is the moment to say, okay, y'all are on the ticket. that's done. Now what are we going to do? What are you going to do for us to entice us? And I've heard so many people say, all she has to do is come out and say arms embargo from Israel, and she would win it in a landslide. I don't know if that's true or not, but I am energized by her pick of Tim
Mm.
Walz. So we can talk about that a little bit in terms of who she was picking from, who her short list was, and who she chose out of that short list. Gives me a little bit of hope that she might be shifting a little bit, but we all know that it ain't over until it's done. So
Not over until it's done.
yeah,
And we have to realistically think about where America is
yeah,
in its evolution.
yeah.
Um, and and what makes sense. And then also all of like the gerrymandering, all of the things that we know are going to be
Oh
happening
yeah.
to the actual elections and counting votes and who's eligible to vote and all
Yeah.
of the things that happen when we get into our presidential election years. And voting has started in certain places, like here's early voting in Florida.
Oh, in Florida already.
We started yesterday, Monday.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I got my pamphlet in the mail and have to go through, what we're looking at as far as our local representatives. But yeah, no, it's starting now.
Well, that makes sense because when Harris was at a rally on, I guess it was the rally on Tuesday after she named her running mate, she said that she was officially the Democratic nominee that the delegates had voted on Monday. So we haven't had the convention yet, but it makes sense because early voting is already starting. If Florida is the only state, or if there are other states that have already started early voting, but I was curious about that when I heard her say that they had already voted, and I thought, well, we haven't had the convention yet, so why? So,
But it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. We already know that Florida is one of those places. It's not a battleground state at all, and especially now since it's a trifecta. But
but it is essential. But it
it's
is essential.
state
It's not
and
battleground, but it is essential. Yeah.
with Floridians and the vote knows how to shift things to have the
Mhm.
outcomes that
They
conservatives
want.
want.
Yeah.
I'm going
Although
to
I
be
did see a really interesting image of
mm,
a rally of people at the Villages in South Florida, which was kind of got itself known back in 2016 when Trump ran the first time against Hillary. And the Villages was just full of white conservative people in their golf carts with their Trump flags all over them. And there was this big parade, and it was a big rally, and it was just this whole big thing. I saw an image the other day of that same space, and they even talked about it, on mainstream media, of course, because it was feel good for them. But it was an image of a bunch of white people in, golf carts in the Villages with Harris Waltz flags all over the place. And so the juxtaposition between 2016 in that same place and now, I thought was interesting. I don't know who crafted it. I'm not saying that it's, written in stone that Florida has done anything different than what it normally does, but I just thought it was interesting. Gave me a little bit of pause to see that big of a change in what was happening in that particular space because, that's like conservative central. So,
we are
um,
definitely conservative central, except in the major large urban areas. So like Miami, Orlando, Jacksonville, you might see that type of sprinkling, but I'm really curious about all the other counties
yeah,
that exist here, even going as far as like West Palm,
yeah,
South Florida, and then continuing to go up through the central West Coast and then into our little Gulf.
yeah,
The golf carts might look a little different there.
yeah. I
Have flags.
don't remember where the Villages is. I know it's in South Florida, but in the general region, but I don't remember exactly. I feel like it's near where Mar-a-Lago is. That's a dendrite that's firing in my head, but I don't know exactly where it is. But it has been in the past a bastion of conservative
Absolutely.
space. And so to see the shift in that image was interesting to me. I don't know again if it has any bearing on anything, but um yeah, I mean,
And speaking of Mar-a-Lago and D. Trump, thinking about him at the with the Black journalists. And
Oh,
that
did you see that?
I didn't see. I mean, I just saw like sprinklings of clips of things. And again, if I'm seeing anything, it's really because it shows up on my inbox on my telephone or
Yeah.
on a algorithm scroll. But yeah, being able to see like the initial clip of Donald Trump beginning the interview and even what happened in that initial,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, question and conversation, we're really literally seeing the devaluing of, you know, populist votes that are out there, especially
Yeah.
from the conservative side, in a
Yeah.
way that folks are doing. And I don't know, with blinders. I mean, we know Donald Trump has his personality. It wasn't surprising to see a reinforcement of what it is that we experience when
Right.
elected officials are speaking to specific populations.
Yeah. I imagine for you, it was hard to watch. It was hard for me to watch. I mean, it was just
Tell me about you.
ugh.
If I like, what were some of the highlights of that for you?
Well, I didn't, I didn't watch the whole thing either. So I too have seen clips and commentary about it, but just his unbridled, and none of this is surprising. This is how he always acts, but his unbridled distaste and dislike and disregard for the whole being of persons that were on the stage with him who were asking him questions and holding him to account and holding him to answers. And it just, it was giving it was giving major plantation in terms of the way he was responding to them and expecting them to back down over his, quips on, you're just being so ugly when you ask your questions. And it just, he's such a dangerous personification of all of the whiteness that lives within this country and all of us that look like me. It just is so it's just it I don't, it's like throw up emoji just times a million, because it's disgusting that he feels so emboldened to behave like that. And then, I was speaking to my brother who is a Black man who lives in North Carolina, and he was talking about how it was shifting for him. I mean, he lives in the town that I grew up in, which is still predominantly white and very racist. And he said, that what used to be hidden for him is now coming back to the foreground, where they, for a while, that he, in his words, and I'm paraphrasing, but for a while it was like, I'm not going to use the M word because that'll get me in trouble. And now I don't care. And that's coming back, which is really scary. And
Like, wait, in England, I think you were telling me about this, about how
yeah,
white people are ambushing.
jobs.
In England, folks are scared to come out of their houses because they're being like directly targeted. And then I'm hearing they're being directly targeted on something that's like false news anyway.
Right.
It's like getting people to be, ready to just be aggressive and be violent.
Yeah.
So it really is, when we're talking about a critical time, thinking about what democracy looks like, with our social conditions look like, what like our the political climate looks like, it really is something that folks should be paying attention. I am choosing to pay attention to, but I really think that folks should definitely be paying attention to kind of all the things that are happening, like the little sprinklings around the globe,
Well, in the theme of our podcast here, what out of the things that we've been talking about, what do you care the most about? What is the thing that rises up for you on top of anything else?
My people. Safety, like really literally, I mean, safety for non-white human beings. And that's when I say people, it's like safety for the majority of humans that exist on the globe. We're not even just talking about US territory anymore. We're literally talking about, there is this narrative, and there's just like this kind of explosive bubbling that feels very real. Speaking to like what your brother was speaking about experiencing, that's a real thing that I'm holding in my body, that is of concern, and that's what I give the most about, completely and totally. Looking at that, we're having a webinar tomorrow with Florida Restorative Justice Association, and we're looking at reimagining safety in schools, like improving the culture and climate in the schools, because they just appropriated a significant amount of money for safety in schools, right, as a result of what happened in Parkland and creating a safe environment. But what they're talking about is putting in, and they've already started it in the county that's next to ours, Broward, during the summertime. They already started putting in the metal detectors. This is something that they did back in the 80s, 90s, 70s, no, 80s, 90s. And like we had all those movies about it. But it, like the level of over criminalization of young people, and then the direct pathway into being system impacted is going to be paramount. And it's not going to create a safer environment, because when you have these things, especially for Black and brown bodies, we were just talking about this in a planning meeting, but for people with Black and brown bodies, that is a reminder of the history of being over criminalized, being over surveilled, being slaves, having to like move and behave in a certain way. Yeah. Because not only is the metal detectors going to be there, but AI is built into these detectors. So now they're screening behaviors, they're screening facial expression, they're screening body language, and those could falsely alert one of these machines to go off. And then that's an entire ripple effect on the way that they have the protocol being built out. So all of these things, the Cop City, I've been saying it, Project 2025, the targeting and labeling of people, the monitoring of like what you're putting on your social media, who's getting taken down, like all of these things that are happening these days is something to be really concerned about, because we're seeing what happens when you know, in Gaza, when you just don't consider people.
And I feel, I mean, that was a lot of what I felt about when they first started talking about putting arming teachers. You know, my first thought was, first of all, you don't pay these people enough to do the job they have to do, that they're supposed to do anyway. And then you're going to put a gun in their classroom and make them responsible for shooting a bad guy who might come into the school and want to cause harm. Okay, on the surface, maybe to protect the kids, very, very tiny little thread of all right, whatever. But then I'm thinking about, one of my first thoughts was, what about the kids of color that are in those classrooms? And we already know there are teachers that get annoyed with kids and overreact. And I've seen, SRO, officers in the schools come in and, turn the kids upside down in their desks and slam them down on a teacher's direction. The teacher says, this kid's out of control, you need to do something. And so I'm thinking, okay, so you're going to put a gun in that person's hand and trust them to not shoot the kids of color, but just because they get out of hand or get out. Yeah. So all of that is just the AI and the facial recognition technology and software, which I have been learning on a steep curve since October about how that's all being workshopped, if you will, and cultivated in Israel, and then coming over here to be used on our streets. And the hypercriminalization is huge. And everything, slavery hasn't gone anywhere for sure. It's still here, and it's morphing. I mean, it's like we're watching it in real time morph into the next iteration of whatever it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause for real concern. So back to our point about what this election looks like, it's great to watch people galvanizing behind, the Harris ticket at this point. I'll be really curious to see what narratives are amplified. We're already seeing like kind of the negativity that's happening with any, folks that are marginalized communities that are kind of rising to the top. And I'm curious to see how we get out the vote and, how we show up, and then how we show up honestly when it's time to actually make your decisions on the ballot, because narratives will look one way and then we see the actual results completely.
Get in there and you pull a lever, nobody's watching, which lever you're going to pull, which circle you're going to fill in.
Which is a real I keep on saying cause for concern, because I'm holding concern about this in elections.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a fuck?
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.